Since her musical debut in 1991, Ashley Cleveland has received 3 Grammy Awards, 2 Dove Awards, has sung background on over 300 albums with artists such as Reba McEntire, Emmylou Harris, Amy Grant, Joe Cocker, and John Hyatt, as well as appearing on Late Night with David Letterman, Saturday Night Live, and Arsenio Hall. She writes about her rocky journey through the world of rock and roll in this book, Little Black Sheep. Ashley, you've come a long way from that little southern girl in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. I love the southern influence there. Yes, ma'am. Now, you say in your book that you grew up in a performance culture, really, but neither of your parents were on stage.
No, my parents were not. Well, they would say they weren't performers, but they were both very, very accomplished people. And we grew up in Southern society, and there was there was kind of an unspoken demand for performance in our family, but also in the culture at large, in the culture that we were born into.
So on the surface, everything looked really prim and polished and good, but
yeah, everything was very beautiful on the surface.
But underneath it, not so much.
No, both of I write in my book that I have a friend that says that all her family are alcoholics except her brother, who's a Baptist, and so so my family was a very similar drinking dynasty, and both of my parents were alcoholic, although that didn't quite manifest itself. It wasn't as clear when I was a child. I think, I was a child who grew up in an atmosphere where I knew things were wrong. I just didn't know what it was. So there was a lot of unspoken, there was a lot of silence that had a lot to say.
And so your parents actually split up when you were a little girl?
Yes, they did. My father was actually gay, and their marriage collapsed fairly early on. And my mother went to work, and eventually she relocated to Northern California, which was culturally so different from anything that I understood as a Tennessee girl. It was kind of devastating to me because I just didn't understand it, and I didn't know how to navigate it. And I was also a broken-hearted child, so I kind of had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder.
So was it in Northern California where you discovered the music scene, and that became your outlet?
Kind of. I mean, I certainly discovered music. I'm a child, I always like to say I'm a child of the late 60s and 70s, so, I know that I grew up in the great musical era. There's no question about it. And so, I discovered music just like any kid would discover music through listening to the radio and records. And but I started playing in church.
In church. So many artists get their beginning in church.
Well, there's very few venues for teenagers that aren't any good, and church, is somewhat more tolerant. At least my church was. They would let the youth group commandeer
it's a good place to kind of cut your teeth on.
Yeah,
on a guitar,
it was great. I mean, it was great for me because I was a bad kid, and I acted out on a very regular basis, and so a lot of the adult feedback in my life was distinctly negative. And but when I got up and started singing, it was the only kind of positive reaction. People would say, wow, you really do that well. And I knew that, I knew I was just sort of marginally good, but I also knew their reaction was genuine, and it meant something to me.
So when you started to enter the world of rock and roll, and you could see the lives that would spiral out of control, like Janis Joplin and Jim Morrison, did you ever think to yourself, okay, that's not going to be me. I'm going to do this right?
No, I didn't. By the time, first of all, that world was, when I started playing music, I was strictly small time. I was playing in little clubs in Knoxville, Tennessee. So that world of rock stars was so far away from me. And by the time, but also, you know, back in those days, the drinking age in Knoxville was 18. And so by the time I was 16 years old, I could get into a bar and talk my way into just about anything. And by the time I was working in the industry, I was already a full-blown alcoholic and drug addict. And so, you know, one of the hallmarks of addicts is our world is very small. We just think about ourselves. So I wasn't comparing myself to anybody else. I was just trying to figure out how I could manage this.
How you could survive till the next gig.
Yeah, or how I could, you know, I think there is addicts have this idea that there is like this secret key to controlling and managing whatever their substance is, to where they can figure out the pearl of great price, which for us is figuring out how to do it with impunity, figuring out how to be moderate. And that one day we can unlock the door to enjoying and controlling our intake. And so, at least for me, I'll just speak for myself, my whole life was about trying to prove that I could do that and failing miserably. And so, you know, that's, and music for me was the one place in my life that had engendered any kind of a positive thing. So it, you know, I always felt like God gave it to me as a lifeline because I wasn't very respectful of the gift. I just, you know, I didn't take care of it. I would drink every time I played, and my performances would suffer as a result. I was very disrespectful of the gift, but it was the one thing that I felt gave me a sense that, well, I actually have something to offer here.
You know, you go into such detail in your book, Little Black Sheep. You're very candid and very honest, and I really appreciate that. It's one of the most honest books I've ever read, where you just lay it all out there. You don't take credit. And you know, you talk a lot about your brokenness in the book. And the tragedy, I think, in so many lives is so many people give up in the middle of their brokenness. Why not you?
Well, you know, I think somewhere along the line, you know, and I start the book by saying, you know, I went through this period where, you know, my prayers would run something like, you know, would it be such a big deal to make me just a little less broken, you know, just so I could function a little better? And I always felt like, you know, whatever my understanding of God was, which at that time was just a little murky for me, I always felt like his response to me was always, no more broken. I want you more broken. And, you know, over time, I think what I understood and what I understand today, because I'm as broken today as I've ever been, and there is, you know, my goal is not wholeness. That belongs to eternity. My goal is to stay tied to the Lord and to be of service in the world. And the only way that the only way that I'm going to have any empathy for you, any concern for anyone outside of myself, is to stay very tied to that deeply broken place. Because if I think I have something going for me, it ain't nothing but disaster. I'm not kidding, you know? So for me, it's hard not to despise my brokenness because it leaks, and you know, and I do something really unpleasant in front of a lot of people on a regular basis. So, you know, I mean, I'm not proud of it, but it's the thing that keeps me on my knees, you know?
When you finally did surrender everything to God, surrender the addiction, surrender the control, surrender it all, what surprised you the most?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that I don't think I did surrender everything. I mean, you know, I talk about in the book that I had a pastor that forbade us to sing "I Surrender All" because he said that's a crock. Nobody does that.
We do it every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but here's the thing. It's like, you know, the scripture is so full of irony. And so the Lord inhabits this massive power in mustard seeds. Do you know what I'm saying? So for me, a tiny bit of surrender is huge. It's a lot of surrender. And so for me, you know, I barely said yes. I barely, and you know, the book talks about, you know, I got sober, I stayed sober for a while, and then I got married, and I was terrified to be married, so I started drinking again. I mean, you know, it's like, it's not, if you're looking for a hero's journey, this would not be that. What this is to say that the power of the living God is so profound, so true, who knew, so real, that my tiny little okay he did massive things with that, and he supplied me with the okay.
Well, that's just it. I mean, God just wants whatever we can give him, and then he multiplies it.
Absolutely.
He becomes so much bigger in our smallness than we ever thought we could.
Yes.
Now, your book, Little Black Sheep, you've actually written a song as well, entitled Little Black Sheep. And I've heard you say that it's more about the shepherd than the sheep.
It's always about the shepherd. If that book is just about me, nobody needs to read it. I mean, everybody's got a story. We all have a story. Mine is colorful, but you know, it's just kind of it's just another story. But to me, the thing that makes it great is the power, you know, is the fact that for no good reason, this magnificent creator of the universe decided to teach me how to live.
And you write about it beautifully in the book and in the song. I'm going to ask you to step away to your guitar now, because you're going to sing that song. Ashley, thank you for being with us on 100 Huntley Street.
Thanks for having me.
Go on over there. And I just want to mention, as you go ahead to the music set, Ashley, that Little Black Sheep, the book, is available on our e-store. You can get your very own copy. As I said earlier, Ashley is very candid and very authentic in her journey with the Lord, and I just want to encourage you to get your very own copy.